Welcome to the Real Freedom Show, where we inspire you to pursue your passion to gain time and financial freedom through opportunities in real estate. I'm your host, Mike Swenson. Let's get some real freedom together. All right, welcome everybody to another episode of Real Freedom, talking about building time and financial freedom through opportunities in real estate. We've talked about a lot of different models, a lot of different strategies here on this show over the last 3 years. And one of the ones that we haven't really dug into deep is arbitrage, the arbitrage method with short-term rentals. And so I'm super excited today. We've got Vince Villani and Adam Hager here. And a little bit about their story is they've had some experience with investing in real estate in the traditional way and decided, hey, we can build cash flow and build revenue first that we can then use in the future if we'd like to invest in real estate. And so, a lot of times with real estate, what people don't realize is the cash flow takes a little bit of time. The amount that you're putting in isn't necessarily what you're going to see right away. You're going to have equity play, you're going to have paying down the mortgage, and you're going to have the tax benefits and all that, but you may not see as much cash flow. And so the arbitrage method is a way where you can see a lot more cash flow a lot more quickly. So they have scaled their business to $250,000, over $250,000 in revenue in just about 6 months of doing this, and have a couple different models, but 10 properties total between them. So Vince and Adam, we're so excited to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Why don't you guys just start by sharing a little bit about your background and your journey and kind of how you got to arbitrage as the method that you guys wanted to pursue?
So Mike, I had gone the traditional real estate route. My goal was always to have the long-term freedom, build that equity, develop cash flow. And, of course, that's our ambition. The first time we purchase a property is like, okay, now I'm going to be the next Grant Cardone, right? But ultimately what ended up happening before Adam and I partnered was I bought my first multifamily home. It was on Long Island. So the numbers were all over the place because the house was insanely expensive, but the rents were also very high. And long story short, ever since I bought that property, the numbers on paper were great. And then every time I would start to develop cash flow, I would have to dump all of that money into some major renovation project. The first year it was a deck, second year was the roof. Recently it was a huge electrician job. And I just called Adam about a horror story that we had a pretty bad leak in the basement recently, mold developed, all this stuff. So I don't even have capital anymore from that property to put back in the property. Now I have to come out of pocket. So now granted, be worth a decent amount of money in 30 years, but that doesn't help us now from the perspective of developing enough cash flow to kind of live your life and get your time back. And that's why we jumped into the arbitrage model. And then I'll have Adam kind of introduce the model a little bit more and why we jumped into it.
Yeah, so I was actually doing Airbnb arbitrage for a year prior to meeting Vince, but I only had one property. I had gotten into it. It immediately was cash flowing, $1,500 to $2,000 a month. So it was doing really well. And I just honestly sat on my laurels. I didn't do anything for essentially an entire year. I didn't add properties. I didn't think of expanding it. I was just, oh, great, extra income, bring it in. I get to the end of the year and I look back and I'm like, what did I do? I had an opportunity here that was clearly working. I could have replicated it. I could have looked to learn more. At the time, I didn't have all the knowledge I needed. I had some, but I didn't have it to the point that I can actually grow it to a multiple six-figure arbitrage business. So I was already aware of Vince. We had known each other prior from college and had mutual friend groups. It's been a few years since then, and we kind of reconnected and talked about this. He was sharing me some of the experiences very similar to what he just said about his long-term rentals. And I was looking for a partner that had his kind of the same longer-term visions of growth. And I kind of talked to him about the arbitrage model, and he really understood it. And then we kind of partnered together and really expanded the last year to the numbers that you just said, well over $250,000 in revenue, 10 properties. We actually just signed an 11th property that we're going to be setting up in 2 weeks, which is great. So we're continuing the expansion. And the great part about arbitrage is I always ask people well, what's your goal with real estate? If you do traditional investing, are you trying to get equity, or are you trying to get cash as soon as possible so you can buy back your time, or you can do other things? Because traditional real estate works. Everybody knows it works. You're going to be able to get properties. The equity is going to go up. You'll be able to buy a property once a year, or you can get investments, funders, etc. You get maybe even 2 a year. You repeat that on cycle. And over time, you are going to build equity in 5 to 10, 15, 20 years. Like, it's going to work. But if you're trying to quit your job, if you're trying to buy back your time, if you're trying to get cash flow from a business to reinvest in properties, I think that short-term rentals, and specifically Airbnb arbitrage, is one of the best ways to do that.
And Mike, I'll add one more thing. I'm sorry. I've been around the Bigger Pockets community for a long time, and that's originally what inspired me to get to long-term rental investing. And I remember the first time I heard of BRRRR, and I was like, okay, this is it, right? Like, this is the way. And the more and more I spoke to people who were at least attempting BRRRR or, starting their BRRRR journey, I started to realize, okay, if I really want to scale with traditional real estate, I have to constantly leverage my debt. And I don't know that I can sleep at night knowing the only way to bring in 5 figures of cash flow is to be $2 million in debt at all times. And I was like, there has to be another way to leverage real estate and profit off of these units. And Adam and I spoke to other folks who were doing the arbitrage model successfully, and it just seemed like the quickest way to go into it without having to leverage capital, because again, each time you want to purchase a new property, that's another 50K out of your pocket, or leverage debt, HELOC. And I didn't feel comfortable playing with my debt that way. Yeah, without going on too much of a rant, that's really the mindset behind why we jumped into arbitrage and why we were dedicated to making it work as quickly as possible.
And for people that don't know about arbitrage, do you want to just give the kind of the quick explanation of what that is for people that are like, I've heard about it or I haven't heard about it? What in the heck is this arbitrage thing?
Sure. So essentially, rental arbitrage is when you approach a landlord to rent out their property. You can almost think of a traditional long-term tenant. They're signing a lease, they're paying a monthly rent, and then they're paying utilities, etc. Well, we're doing the exact same thing. We're working with landlords. We're signing a lease. We're paying rent every single month. We're paying utilities. However, we then get permission from the landlord to relist their property on different short-term rental sites. And we now profit the difference between the revenue that we bring in from these sites and our expenses, such as rent, utilities, Wi-Fi, and cleaning costs. So after all those expenses, we profit the difference. And the difference here is we only have to, a real only investment is investing in furniture. And as we'll get into later, there are actually ways where you can invest in furniture, etc., without even using your own cash or capital.
Mm-hmm. The one thing I'll tack on to that too is we always get the follow-up question, well, isn't that the same as subletting? And I guess in theory, it is similar to subletting, but the difference is, this is the analogy I always use, and it's like a restaurant owner, like a restaurant operator, right? You're leasing the space to run your business out of. It's a little bit different than just like, hey, I'm trying to pocket some extra cash by renting it out to other people at a shorter term basis. Like you're leasing the space and you have a professional relationship with the landlord now. It's almost like you're offering property management to the landlord, but at no cost to them. And that's one of the advantages of them working with you.
Yeah, it'd be just like if I, had a commercial space on Main Street and I was like, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, I'd like to rent this space from you to be able to run my business. It's similar to that. Your business just happens to be providing housing and hospitality on top of that. The kind of the key piece of, I often tell people that are doing short-term rentals, like your hospitality, you're not housing, but you're running your hospitality business in their property.
Absolutely.
Now, for you guys, where are your arbitrage units located?
So right now, all of them are across Pennsylvania and New Jersey. We started within like a 3-hour distance from where we are. However, in the second half of the year now, we're going to be expanding into multiple states now that we have a team in place, et cetera. It's one of those things that can be operated completely remotely. I think a question a lot of people have is, my area isn't good, or I don't think there's a lot of traffic, or I don't think it's a great vacation spot. Very often, that's not true. There's usually opportunities within an hour to 2 hours from where they are. Because if you think about it, the average person really just wants to make an extra $5,000 to $10,000 per month in cash flow. Like if they make an extra $5,000 to $10,000 per month in cash flow, they're happy as a clam. Like they're doing everything they want to do. So that's really only 3 to 7 deals. Right? The chances are that there is a market within 2 hours of them that they could go to set up their first property and get 1 to 4 places that are going to cash flow $1,000, $2,000 a month in profit to help them get to that number pretty quickly. They don't need to be in a beach town. They don't need to be in the biggest cities. Like our first property was in our local town that only has 100 Airbnbs, that isn't known for tourism or anything like that, and it's been consistently cash flowing.
One of the things that I encourage my investors on, when they're getting into traditional investing is you got to get started to get better. And for somebody that's pursuing this model, you could maybe find the most lucrative property in the United States in the future, but you got to learn a lot about how to run the business, how to set up your systems and all that first. And so the best analogy I heard, going back to the bigger pockets references, every investment doesn't have to be a home run. You're still going to have singles and doubles and maybe a couple of triples sprinkled in there to be successful, but it's the singles and the doubles that are going to help you learn and grow so that you can get better and find those more profitable ones, or you can move into a luxury, opportunity in the future. But you got to get set up first and learn the business before you can, look for some of those opportunities.
100%.
In terms of getting those initial properties and systems set out, talk about some of the challenges or learnings or things like that you had to go from, that one property to now getting up to, adding so many here in the course of 6 months. What was some of the stuff that you had to go through to expand?
That happened very quick, Mike. And honestly, it happened quick because it's not too difficult, truthfully. It's just a matter of being persistent. And then once you understand how to articulate the benefits of what you're doing, before you know it, you'll have too many opportunities to really accept. As a matter of fact, that's what happened to us month one. So to answer your question a little more directly, it's really about understanding market, right? And the two aspects of understanding a market are the restrictions and what are the restrictions? And the other is, will it financially meet my goals? And really the best ways to research that: restrictions, Google search. And then as for financial analysis, we use a platform, AirDNA, but you can use some other platforms as well. But once you have that information, Mike, it's really just about reaching out to landlords who have units available for rent that match what you're looking for and what you think will be successful in that city. And once you do that, you kind of cluster all of your viewings on a weekend if it's a city that's not quite in your backyard. And then from there, before you know it, you'll have offers for multiple units at one time. As a matter of fact, Adam and I are still kicking ourselves in the butt, but month one, we went out and we looked at, I don't know, maybe 5, 6, 7 units that day. And we had about 3 different offers and we could only pick one because at the time we didn't understand how to leverage our capital the right way. And we accepted one deal, said no to these 2 others. And in retrospect, they would have been killer deals. But the reality is really just about coming across professional, knowing how to articulate the benefits. And then once you have that pitch, so to speak, down, it's really not too difficult. It's a numbers game at that point.
Well, and the reality is you still picked one. Most people out there probably wouldn't have even moved forward. And so they're still sitting at 0. And so the longer I'm in the investment space with people, the more I just encourage you got to do something. You got to do something. You got to get started. And so hats off to pick one to begin with instead of, great. You can kick yourself over not getting 2 and 3. But most people listening to this podcast are going to be like, oh, that's such an awesome idea, and then never do anything about it.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
I think the lowest hanging fruit that someone could do if they want the absolute 0 risk to get into a deal would be the following. It would be, first, identify the area that you think may be potentially good. Second is look for landlords who are renting out the space with the furniture. They're already renting it with the furniture and they don't want to get rid of the furniture. Like, they want someone to rent it with the furniture. Now, those people, first off, they usually mark up the price a little higher because they think they can get more. But usually what happens is it's actually harder for them to rent it out because not a lot of people want something that has all the furniture. So right away, there's already better negotiation ability from the value that you bring in to go to them and get the rent lowered. Second, there's a model, property management. People usually think of property management of a company that does this for maybe long-term rentals and just manages them. But you can do the exact same thing for short-term rentals. So you can be a property manager and approach this landlord and explain to them the value of what you do and split the profits on the deal of what you're managing for them. So you're still doing all the same work of managing it on short-term rental platforms, but now you have $0 invested. You have 0, and then the landlord doesn't have to put any money into furniture. So it makes it a no-brainer for them. There may be $2,000 in additional costs you need for some stuff they don't have, but that's really nothing to the landlord, because the landlord's going to end up making way more than he would have made with a regular renter. And now you're going to get a cut of that just for management. So even if you don't know everything that you're doing, you're getting experience, you're getting in, you actually cannot lose because you have no expenses. So you can only make money from day one. And that is the easiest, lowest hanging fruit of the least risk type of deal that you could start in short-term rentals.
What weight would you give to balancing optimum spot, optimum finishings, optimum look versus something like that that's a little bit more of a layup type deal that you can get? How much are you balancing? Am I trying to just take something to get going and build that income, or do I want to hold out a little bit for that property that I think can be a lot more successful right out of the gate and not necessarily handicap you right at the beginning with a suboptimal property?
That's a great question, Mike. My advice would be get started with what you can take, because then you'll develop the experience, right? So like if you wait for that perfect unicorn deal to come by, you may not know what to do with that opportunity when you get it, right? So the thing is, there is a little bit of a learning curve. I mean, it's not drastic, but just understanding the operational side of the business, which the beauty of this business model is it eventually can just be handed off to virtual assistants, people to automate that for you, and software. But the reality is, for your very first unit, I would argue that don't wait for the unicorn deal. Wait for something that, I mean, just like with traditional real estate, right? Wait for something that has at least sensible numbers on paper. And if it makes sense, go for it, because then you'll get the experience. And then the next time you reach out for more units, you'll have infinitely more confidence when you do that, right? So there isn't really like the unicorn deal that's going to come by that's going to be visible right away, right? Like you'll know what to look for the more experience you get with this, because you'll understand why certain listings do better than others. Make sense?
Mm-hmm. Now, when you guys look to expand and grow, how confident would you say you were in kind of understanding what people are looking for, kind of what that appeal is, and then knowing how to price that? And even too, probably furnish it with furnishings that would fit what you're trying to attract. Talk about that learning curve, because I feel like for people that haven't done this before or pursued it, that's probably something they're like, I don't know anything about that. What do I do?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something you have to build confidence in through experience and learning the different skill sets. Like nowadays, I can look at the listings in the area and I'm like, okay, I can outperform this listing. I can outperform this listing. I can market better than this listing. Because the truth is that most people still have no idea how to market their listing. Like they don't know the best way to present it. We get messages all the time from people, hey, I'm not getting any bookings on my listing. Can you take a look at it? The reason they're not getting any bookings is not because the place isn't good or the location isn't good or like they couldn't. It's because they're just not marketing it correctly. And like you said, pricing is a huge thing. Price optimization is a huge thing. The best thing you can do for that is first off, pay for a software. So I talked with a buddy of mine who owns a property in Florida. He was getting booked out 8 months in advance. And I told him that's bad. And he's like, what do you mean that's bad? I'm making all this money. I'm like, that's bad because that means you are underpricing so much that it is getting booked out 8 months in advance. You want your what's called lead time, which is how far you're getting booked, to be much less than that. And I looked at it and it's because he didn't have a pricing structure. He didn't have a software he was using for pricing. And I was showing him similar properties that were making $30,000 a year more than him, that just all they did was price higher and they had better pricing. And he was like, oh my gosh. So we got him on a software and we got him going with it. And he's making tremendously more money. Now his lead time isn't 8 months, but that doesn't matter. What matters is how much you actually getting booked at when people are booking. So these are definitely important skills. And to be honest, like you kind of have to at some point and work with coach of some kind. Vince and I worked with the coach when we started. I went through multiple programs just to learn as much as I could. Not necessarily always one-on-one with the individual, but I at least paid for a program to go see what they were doing and their perspective on it as I built these skills. It's very hard to just go from zero and assume that you're going to figure it all out. You really kind of need to get ahead in some fashion, and consuming content and paying for courses is the best thing you can do. Obviously, there's nothing can beat one-on-one, but if you can't afford one-on-one or you don't want to commit to that investment right away, I would still urge people to buy some sort of program, because at least you're going to have the basics of understanding to speed up that process. Because otherwise it may take you 6 months to learn the same lessons that you could have earned in a month. And that's what we did. We really just consumed a bunch of content and all these different skill sets. And then through experience of implementing it, we had our own strategies, and then we crafted our own unique style. And Vince has his own plans of how he does designing. As Vince designs all of our units. I don't do any designing, so any questions around that would be him. But he went out there and he learned all this additional stuff too. And the skills compile over time. So the best thing someone can do is they got to invest in some sort of course or program, even if the program's a couple $100. Like, it's going to be very hard for them to get the knowledge to outcompete competitors and really understand all the aspects of the business just through trial and error.
Yeah, Mike, the Instagrammers of the world have made this a very popular business model, and it's very competitive now. Now, granted, not everybody in the space is a professional operator, but that's what getting a professional operator gets you, is you now are ahead of a lot of the people that are just dabbling in this, who are taking pictures with their iPhone and posting it on Airbnb. Like, you don't want to be that person, because then you're risking spending all this time and energy and not making the cash flow that you could make. And the other thing Adam said too is everyone's fixated on the occupancy rate, right? Like, I can't tell you how many people are like, oh, my unit's going really well, it's at 100% occupancy. But that means nothing if it's $50 a night, right? Like, I could get 100% occupancy if I just put my prices to the floor. So occupancy does not mean you are making as much money as you could. As a matter of fact, if you're above 90% occupancy, typically you're leaving a lot of money on the table. So there's a difference between doing Airbnb arbitrage and property management and making some money versus maximizing the income that you're making on the model, and operating it professionally. So we certainly had to learn new ways to do that from other 7- and 8-figure hosts out there. And if we didn't invest into people like that, I think we would have never understood what we were leaving on the table. So that's something we strongly recommend, is seeking kind of professional guidance for sure.
Have you ever heard the phrase, you're the average of the top 5 people that you hang around? Well, real estate agents, I'm excited to increase your 5 with you. We're launching the Real Freedom Investor Agent Tribe to help you get educated and connect with others to build your real estate investing journey, and also to help you along the way as you're working with real estate investors. So come check it out on our website, realfreedom.com. Go to the store. We have a membership, we have a mastermind group, and private coaching to help you stay accountable to your real estate investing goals, and to make sure that you connect with like-minded people to accelerate your progress and to cheer you on along the way. Check it out, realfreedom.com. Click on the store. You mentioned about designing it, amenities. What are some of those things that people are looking for?
Every city is different. Like, for example, and that's actually the cool thing about this, is like, the whole purpose of somebody booking an Airbnb is they want to live like a local. They don't really want to just stay in a hotel. So, like, for example, if you're in New York City, which, by the way, is an awful area to try and start here because of the restrictions, but if you're in an area like New York City and you have parking as an amenity, that's like gold, right? But in like, if you do it in your backyard in Minnesota, parking might be like standard, right? So from a furnishing standpoint, you can add amenities that will make your listing a little bit more competitive, whether it's things like a children's room, a game room, things that might separate yourself from other listings. But the reality is, sometimes the amenities are found just in areas that you can't control, right? A pool, parking, washer and dryer. Those are things that are typically in the unit before you even obtain it. But that's part of the research phase. Part of the research phase is identifying, if I'm looking in Minnesota, Minneapolis, etc., what are the best units offering that other units are not? And then how do I make sure I have that in my listing? And then once you understand that, you really set yourself up to be a 75th percentile or higher unit, because you have the things that are causing the most bookings. From a furnishing standpoint, it's really about potentially maximizing bedrooms or beds, like housing space. But then you can really get into the weeds and the creative side. Like, if you want to create an experience type stay that other people don't offer, that's another thing that drives bookings as well. So a lot of ways to go about that, for sure.
So what are you guys looking to do? I mean, you've experienced a lot of success these last 6 months. What are you looking to do here moving forward?
Yeah, we're trying to get to 20 units by the end of the year. And then we're going to reevaluate. We're still probably going to continue with rental arbitrage. We just may shift the type of deal we're doing, right? Or the way they're doing it. So within rental arbitrage, there's so much to talk about. There's many different ways. We're specifically focusing on houses and ideally even more luxury houses. However, there are also people who do rental arbitrage that target apartment buildings, and their whole goal is to get as many in apartment buildings as possible. That's a different sales process. That's a slightly different management process. The numbers on those deals are different. From a beginner's friendly standpoint, the easiest thing you can do is find a house or like a single apartment that's not in a huge complex. Going after large complex deals and trying to get 5 units at once is probably going to lead to disaster in a few different ways until you have your operations, etc., set up. So, everybody gets into this with wanting to get cash flow to reinvest in equity. And I think that's great. And I think that Vince and I will eventually do that. However, I mean, if you just keep adding rental properties and short-term rental properties, your cash flow just goes up and up and up and up and up. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's really no limit to how grow you can big. You're just adding a team, it becomes slightly more complex. But there's no reason to stop if it's working and the system's going. And we're young, obviously, right? We have time. We don't necessarily we can always build that. So we're just trying to build as much cash flow as possible for this. And then will we eventually invest into deals and get equity, et cetera, and maybe do large vacation rentals that we put into short-term rentals that we purchase? Yes, but for the immediate future, the plan is really just going to be continue to stack and repeat on this model.
Yeah. Mike, one more thing too, just to clarify, we started this expansion journey in February, and that 1 to 10 unit mark was really achieved just in February, March, April, May. And we stopped after May. It was actually to build some resources for others to learn how to do this. But so since then, we haven't continued expansion. And the deal that we just obtained the other day was from one of our original landlords that said, "Hey, I've got another unit available. Do you want it?" So the reason I mention that is not like in a boastful manner at all. It's just that it was 4 months, head down, shut up, do the hard work. And then if we didn't stop to build out our resources and whatnot, we probably would have been at 20 units by now, right? So that's how quickly things can happen. And it's really just a matter of knowing how to do it once, do it well, and then after that first unit, it is infinitely easier to tack on additional units, especially when you're established in a particular market.
Our time flies by really quickly here, but for people that want to learn more about you and what you guys are doing, or maybe reach out with questions, how can they do that?
They can add us on social media, or I guess I'd recommend reaching out to me via Facebook. I mean, Vince Anthony is my name there. Another easy way to get in touch with us is just to head to airpreneur.com. So like entrepreneur, but airpreneur.com, and you'll have an option to just book some time to chat with us there. I think those are the best ways to get in touch with us.
Should have wear your airpreneur hat, Vince.
Waiting for it to get embroidered, okay? Or else I'd be rocking the merch. But yeah, that's probably the best way to get in touch with us, airpreneur.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for coming on and sharing your story. It's excited to see somebody that can have such large success so quickly and hopefully inspire other people to do the same. Like, yeah, you don't have to chase the long-term gains. You can, that's great. Or you can do something that's going to build some cash flow in the short term and use that to fuel long-term stuff. So congratulations to your guys' success.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Thanks for having us on.